They burned her land and tied her to a hitching rail until a lone sharpshooter said, "Run, I dare you." They used to say the land itself bled in those years, a time when men killed over waterholes, fence lines, and the stretch of dirt their cattle trampled. The law, if it came at all, arrived days too late and miles too short. The American frontier was a raw, untamed beast, and in its dust-choked towns and sprawling canyons, survival belonged to those ruthless enough to carve their name into it with blood and fire. Dry Fork Canyon was one such place, the kind of nowhere spot that didn't exist on most maps, where the wind howled like an old woman's lament, and men carried their past on their backs like worn saddlebags. Among the scattered ranches and brittle sagebrush, a patch of stubborn land belonged to Martha Cade. She wasn't born for this life, but it claimed her all the same. A widow at 28, Martha had buried her husband, Tom Cade, beneath the stunted cottonwood the year before, the headstone nothing but a weather-smoothed slab of rock. Most would have packed up, taken a ride to safer places east of the Rockies, but not Martha. The land was all she had left, and she meant to keep it. The Claymore gang didn't see it that way. They came at dawn, riding out of the hills with the first streaks of light painting the sky a weak, bloody pink. Judd Claymore led them, a scar pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent sneer. A hard man, forged mean in Confederate grays and outlaw raids, with murder in his veins. Beside him rode Elias Brand, a dead-eyed sharpshooter with a long-barreled rifle and a reputation that stretched from Santa Fe to Abilene. The others, a loose gathering of cutthroats and cattle thieves, rode with the easy cruelty of men who had burned homes before and would again. They set upon the ranch like wolves. Flames caught in the dry straw of the barn in seconds, a column of smoke rising against the clear morning sky. The cattle spooked and scattered as gunshots cracked through the still air. 2 heifers dropped in the dust, their lifeless eyes reflecting the flicker of fire. Martha saw them coming from the front porch, the rifle in her hands older than she was, but cleaned and loaded. She stood there barefoot, nightdress stained with sweat and dust, hair unbound and wild in the wind. A lesser soul might have bolted for the hills, but she stayed, the barrel of her rifle steady against her shoulder. Judd pulled his horse to a stop a dozen paces away, grinning as if this were a Sunday amusement. "Morning, Mrs. Cade," he called, voice thick with mock courtesy. "I'm here to make you an offer. One last time." Martha's jaw clenched. She sighted down the barrel at him, speaking low. "You so much as set one foot on my land, Judd, I'll drop you where you sit." Judd laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "Martha, darling, you're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time." "I got 1 bullet for you," she said. "That'll be enough." A moment hung in the air, brittle as dry twigs. Then Elias Brand raised his rifle, and the crack of the shot tore through the morning. The bullet splintered the post near Martha's shoulder. She flinched but didn't drop the weapon. The second shot shattered the window behind her. It was over before the third. One of Judd's men grabbed her from behind as she fired, the shot going wide. They dragged her down, her bare feet scraping through the dust, the rifle torn from her grasp. She fought like a feral cat, nails drawing blood, teeth sinking into her wrist. But there were too many of them. They dragged her clear as her house caught fire, the dry timbers going up with a roar. The Claymore gang took her to town, a grueling ride under the unforgiving sun. Martha's face was bruised, blood from a split lip tracing down her chin, but her eyes stayed cold. The town of Dry Fork watched in silence as the gang tied her to the hitching rail outside the saloon. The old wood, polished smooth by 100 rains, dug into her back as the coarse rope bit at her wrists. Judd dismounted, sauntered up, and tipped his hat mockingly. "Let this be a lesson to any fool thinks they can stand against the Claymore gang," he announced to no one in particular. The townsfolk kept their heads down, some shuffling away, others pretending to see nothing. No sheriff in sight. There hadn't been one since the last man to wear a badge took a bullet in the neck 2 years back. Elias Brand stood off to the side, leaning on his rifle, his expression unreadable. The others jeered, spitting in the dirt and boasting about what they'd do when dusk came. No one noticed the stranger. He came into town quiet as a drifting shadow, lean and weathered, gray beard lining a face that had seen too many years of war and wilderness. Jonas Creed, a name long forgotten by most, but whispered still in old saloons where the war's dead were counted by stories and empty chairs. He stood at the edge of the street, hat low, eyes hard beneath the brim. He watched it all, the fire smoke smudging the horizon, the way Martha lifted her chin even now, refusing to bow. No one saw his hand rest lightly on the stock of a long rifle strapped across his back. No one heard the dry leather creak as his fingers flexed. Evening came, the sun sinking like a burning ember into the hills. The wind carried smoke and the scent of scorched earth. The Claymore men drifted into the saloon, leaving Martha Cade, bloodied and alone in the cooling air. She spoke then, so softly only the dry wind and Jonas Creed heard it. "I swear to God," she murmured, "I'll bury every last one of you bastards." And somewhere far off a wolf howled. They say the frontier had a way of swallowing men whole, grinding them down to dust and legend, leaving behind only names spoken low in saloons and around dying campfires. There were men whose stories faded before their bones did, and others whose deeds kept them tethered to the land long after they vanished. The stranger was one of them. Every town knew one, a man with no past, no home, and no mercy, carrying the weight of old wars and older sins. Jonas Creed was such a man. He rode into Dry Fork Canyon without ceremony. A lean figure on a weather-beaten gelding had pulled low against the glare of the setting sun. The town barely spared him a glance, their eyes trained instead on the hitching post, where Martha Cade hung by her wrists, a bruised testament to the Claymore gang's rule. No one wanted to meet a stranger's gaze these days. Too many strangers carried death behind their eyes. Jonas hitched his horse outside the saloon, the only building in town with a pulse, and stepped inside. The room smelled of sweat, gun oil, and cheap whiskey. Laughter rose from a cluster of men in trail-dusty coats and wide-brimmed hats, pistols slung low and casual. Judd Claymore sat at the center, boots up on a table, bottle in hand, spinning tales of land taken and men buried. Elias Brand, the pale-eyed marksman, stood with his back to the far wall, cleaning his rifle with the precision of a man for whom killing was more habit than duty. Jonas took a seat in the corner, back to the wall, facing the room. He let his eyes drift across the faces, counting them without seeming to. 8 men, not including Judd and Elias. Enough to burn a town and laugh about it. He didn't order a drink, didn't speak, just sat with the slow patience of a man used to waiting out trouble. The bartender, a wiry fellow with a nervous tick in his left eye, approached hesitantly. He wiped at a glass that didn't need wiping, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting Judd to notice. "Evenin'," he mumbled. Jonas raised his head slightly. "Bottle of rye," he said. His voice was rough, worn thin like an old saddle strap. The bottle appeared, along with a single glass. The bartender lingered. "Friend," he said low, "if you got any sense, you'll ride out of here come sunup. This town ain't no place for a stranger right now." Jonas poured a measure of whiskey, watching it settle. "Woman outside," he said. "What's her crime?" The man's Adam's apple bobbed. "Standin' in the Claymore's way. Land dispute, same as always. She wouldn't sell, wouldn't leave. They burned her out this morning." Jonas drank. The liquor burned down his throat like an old, familiar fire. "They mean to hang her?" he asked. The bartender's glance flicked to the back room. "Judd says come dawn, she'll swing from the gallows they put up yonder. Make an example." Jonas set the glass down. "Lawman." The bartender laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Ain't been one since Sheriff Tate caught a bullet in the neck 2 winters ago. Town's run by fear now." Jonas nodded, as if confirming a fact already known. He left the bottle and stepped out into the gathering dusk, the horizon bleeding red behind the hills. The heat of the day clung stubbornly to the dust and the stones, but a cool wind whispered promises of night. Jonas moved down the street, his boots stirring the dirt in steady, unhurried steps. A figure detached itself from the shadows near the livery, an old man, hunched, with a limp in one leg and a face like sun-baked leather. He wore a battered Union cavalry hat, its faded blue ribbon hanging in tatters. "Damn me," the old man said, squinting. "Jonas Creed. I thought you were dead." Jonas paused. "Silas Dent," he replied, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. Silas chuckled, though it sounded more like a cough. "Not dead yet, though I've been trying for years. Word was you vanished after Shiloh." Jonas's gaze darkened at the name. He didn't answer. Silas spat into the dirt. "Ain't no one here remembers you, boy. Might be better that way. Claymore's got this town strangled tight. You go meddlin', you'll hang right alongside that girl." Jonas looked toward the hitching post, where Martha Cade sagged against her bonds, head bowed but unbroken. The flickering light from the saloon windows cast uneven shadows, painting her bruises in sharp relief. "She ain't the first," Silas muttered, "but she might be the last if someone don't stop him." "Why haven't you?" Jonas asked. Silas's face tightened. "I fought my wars. Ain't got the stomach for another." Jonas nodded, as if that settled it. He stepped past the old man, making his way down the street. The town watched from behind shuttered windows, faces pale and ashamed. Not one man willing to lift a hand, not one soul bold enough to speak. Martha lifted her head as Jonas passed. Blood traced the line of her jaw. Her lips split and crusted dark. Her eyes, though, fierce and sharp as a hawk's. She was speaking to herself, a steady whisper like a prayer or a curse. Jonas stopped in the gloom, watching her for a long moment. Jed Claymore's voice drifted from the saloon, loud and careless. He was drunk enough now that plans spilled from his mouth like cheap whiskey. The gang would post lookouts, lay a trap for any fool who came for her. Come dawn, she'd hang. No sense in risking bullets when time would do their work. Jonas took it all in, letting the words settle like dust in his mind. The town's air felt thick with fear. Every creak of a shutter, every shift in the wind spoke of people who had once believed in justice, now long broken. Jonas moved unseen, the night a cloak around him. He checked the street, noted where the shadows fell deepest, where the line of sight from the saloon's windows faltered. He marked the rooftops, the blind corners, the old bell tower, with its perfect view of the main street. He saw the places where a man might hide a rifle or set a snare. It was old habit, learned long before on battlefields where every hillock and hollow could mean life or death. In the back alley behind the saloon, he caught a snatch of conversation. Judd and Elias, their words sharp as broken glass. "Town's got no backbone," Judd said. "If anyone tries, we'll get him. Rand will be up on the roof at first light. I want eyes on every corner. Nobody touches that woman till sunup." Elias's voice followed, flat and cold. "Don't much like leaving her there. You gone soft. Just don't like loose ends. Then keep your sights steady, and we'll have no loose ends." Jonas slipped away before their footsteps reached the back door. He returned to the street like a shadow, moving with the deliberate, steady pace of a man who knew how long he had. The night deepened, stars gathering overhead in cold, silent witness. The wind picked up, carrying with it the dry scent of burned wood and old blood. Jonas stepped out of the gloom at the hitching post, leaning one shoulder against the rail. Martha's head lifted, her eyes narrowing. He said nothing for a moment, the silence heavy around them. Then, in a voice worn smooth by years and distance, he murmured, "Run, I dare you." And in those 4 words, something shifted. The wind changed direction. The town, though it didn't know it yet, was about to remember what it meant to bleed for something worth saving. Dawn came slow to Dry Fork Canyon, bleeding across the horizon in long, jagged streaks of crimson and gold. Out here, in the rough places where law came late or not at all, dawn was a sacred, dangerous hour. It was when men settled old grudges with cold steel and quicker bullets, when debts were called in, and the ground drank whatever blood was owed. The town was dead quiet. No birds, no wind. Just the dry, sharp crackle of dying embers, where Martha Cade's home had once stood, miles to the east, and the low mutter of outlaws readying themselves for another bit of bloody work. Jed Claymore stood in the street, the last of his bottle empty in his hand, face slack with drink and something darker. The hangover rode him hard, but the cruel grin twisting his scarred mouth stayed sharp. He spat into the dust and waved a hand to his men. "Circle up," he barked. "No gallows today. We'll do it our way. Put her in the dirt right here, where God and everybody can see." The gang moved quick, forming a loose ring around the hitching post where Martha hung, wrists bound, hair matted with blood and dust. Elias Brand was already in place, crouched low behind a rain barrel, his rifle aimed, pale eyes scanning the rooftops like a hawk. He didn't like this. His gut itched the way it did before bullets started flying. The streets were too empty, the air too still. On the roof of the old mercantile, Jonas Creed lay prone, his rifle cradled against his shoulder. The morning light crept across the ground like a predator stalking a kill. His breathing was even, his pulse steady. He'd fought in places like this before: Vicksburg, Shiloh, nameless ridges where blue and gray bled the same. He watched Judd swagger forward, raising his pistol with theatrical slowness, like a man savoring his last cruel joke. "You ready to meet your husband, girl?" Judd called, loud enough for the windows to rattle. "Hope you said your prayers." Jonas exhaled a long, patient breath and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle split the dawn, sharp and clean. Judd's pistol flew from his hand in a burst of blood and splinters. He howled, clutching his shattered wrist as the weapon spun into the dirt. The ring of outlaws jolted, confusion spilling into fear. "Sniper!" Elias shouted, ducking behind the barrel as another shot punched through the shoulder of a man near him, sending the outlaw spinning to the ground. Chaos tore through the street. Gang members scrambled for cover behind barrels, hitching posts, and the heavy beams of the saloon's porch. Bullets hissed through the air, kicking up dirt and splinters. Jonas moved like a machine, working the rifle's bolt, shifting positions along the roofline. He used every trick the old war had taught him, angling shots to ricochet off iron and stone, sending slivers of lead into places no man would expect. His bullets found knees, elbows, shoulders. He didn't waste a shot. Elias Brand knew the style, the rhythm of it, the way the shots came, one clean, one misdirection, one to pin. It spoke of battlefield work. He remembered it from Tennessee, from the fog-choked woods at dawn where bluecoats fell like wheat beneath a scythe. "Jonas Creed," he muttered, a grim smile tightening his face. "Son of a bitch." Elias adjusted his sights, looking for a tell, the glint of a scope, the flicker of a shadow. He fired twice, sending sharp reports into the rooftops, but Jonas was already moving. Martha, forgotten in the initial chaos, felt the rope loosen. A stray bullet had snapped one of the knots. Blood ran down her arms, but her fingers found a jagged shard of glass in the dust, and she sawed at the remaining ties with desperate, clumsy strength. A bullet struck the hitching post inches from her head. She hit the dirt, rolling toward the nearest trough. Pain sang in her ribs, where a boot had landed the night before, but she was alive. Alive, and with murder in her heart. The townsfolk, long cowed into silence, peered from behind doors and windows. For the first time in years, the Claymore gang looked vulnerable, mortal. Old Sam Weller, the blacksmith, hefted a hammer in his calloused hand. Young Pete Carver clutched his father's revolver, hand shaking but determined. Fear cracked, and fury took its place. Silas Dent limped into the fray, rifle in hand, as a stray bullet whipped past him. He spotted a boy, no more than 6, frozen in the middle of the street, wide-eyed. The child's mother screamed from a doorway, but couldn't reach him. Without thinking, Silas dove, tackling the boy into the dirt as a shot tore the air where the child's head had been. He grunted as pain lanced through his side, but kept moving, dragging the boy behind a trough. Jonas and Elias waged their silent, deadly duel amid the mayhem. Shot after shot cracked between them, neither man wasting a round. Jonas grazed Elias's ear, drawing blood. Elias punched a hole through the brim of Jonas's hat. Jonas ducked behind a chimney stack, sweat slick on his back despite the morning chill. He reached into his pack and pulled a battered shaving mirror from his kit, a relic from another life. Propping it against a broken crate, he angled it just so, catching the low slant of the sun. Elias, thinking he saw a flicker of movement, lined up his shot. The sun caught his eyes, a sudden, blinding glare. His aim faltered for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Jonas's bullet struck true, punching clean through Elias's heart. The sharpshooter staggered, shock and recognition on his face, then crumpled beside his rifle. Judd Claymore, blood slick on his wrist, saw the tide turn. His men were dead or dying. The townsfolk emboldened, armed now with whatever they could carry, shovels, pistols, fence posts. He dropped his weapon and raised his good hand. "Wait," he bellowed. "Wait, goddammit. Mercy." He stumbled into the open street, face twisted in pain and fear. Martha stood there. The revolver Jonas had left for her in hand. Her face was bruised, bloodied, but her eyes were clear as glass. Judd fell to his knees. "Please, Martha," he begged. It wasn't. I was drunk, I didn't mean." "You burned my land," she said quietly, voice raw but steady. "You tried to kill me. You murdered good men." He sobbed, a broken thing now. "I'm begging you, girl." Jonas, watching from the rooftop, made no move to stop her. Some debts weren't his to settle. Martha raised the revolver. "Beg God." The shot echoed like thunder in the dawn. Judd Claymore crumpled forward into the dust. A hush fell over Dry Fork. Smoke drifted in lazy spirals. The sun broke fully over the hills, warm and indifferent to the blood it shone upon. Jonas slung his rifle and vanished from the rooftop, leaving the town to its reckoning. The silence that followed the last gunshot was the kind of quiet a town didn't hear often. Thick, heavy, and almost reverent, like a church after a funeral sermon. Smoke drifted lazily over the street, curling around bodies sprawled in the dirt. Guns lay discarded, still warm, while blood stained the earth in dark, widening patches. One by one, doors creaked open. Faces appeared at windows, cautious and wide-eyed. The people of Dry Fork Canyon emerged like animals from burrows after a storm, blinking against the morning light and the sudden, improbable calm. Men, women, children. They stepped into the street where only hours before no one dared to lift their eyes. Martha Cade sat in the dust, cradling her bleeding wrists. Her hair clung to her face, caked with sweat and blood. The revolver hung loosely in her hand, the cylinder empty, the weight of it heavier than she remembered. She looked around at the fallen gang, at Judd Claymore's corpse lying in the dirt like a broken rag doll. The world felt strange and still, as though holding its breath. Across the street, Jonas Creed stepped down from the mercantile roof. He moved with the same slow, steady stride, not a man celebrating victory, just finishing a job that needed doing. He dusted ash from his coat, retrieved his battered hat from the blood-specked ground, and slung his rifle over one shoulder. The townsfolk gave him space as he walked. No one spoke at first, until old Silas Dent hobbled forward, leaning hard on his rifle. His limp was worse than usual, but his chin was high. "You folks don't know the man you're looking at," Silas said, his voice carrying like it had in his younger days, when he commanded men at Gettysburg. He turned to face the crowd, his weathered face fierce. "Name's Jonas Creed. Some of you might remember it. Some won't. He fought for the Union, one of the best sharpshooters I ever saw. They called him the Deadeye of Shiloh." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Names like that carried weight out here, even years after the war was done. Jonas said nothing, only adjusted the brim of his hat. Silas went on. "He was a good man once, but a bad war, bad luck, and worse men turned his name to mud. Falsely accused of shooting his own during a raid gone sideways. Hunted by lawmen and bushwhackers alike. They buried his legend, 'cause it was easier than admitting the army made a mistake." He turned toward Jonas. "But I knew. I was there, and I ain't never forgotten." Jonas met his gaze for a long moment. No words passed between them. None needed to. A young man, barely old enough to shave, stepped forward. "Mr. Creed, you saved this town. Saved Miss Cade. We could use a man like you here." Others nodded. A few men tipped their hats, shame and gratitude fighting for space on their faces. Even in a lawless land, decency sometimes found a way to crawl back into a man's heart. Jonas shook his head slowly. "I ain't meant to stay, boy," he said, voice rough as dry gravel. "A place like this deserves men with clean hands." Mine ain't been clean in a long time. Martha rose unsteadily, blood streaking her arms and dirt caked into the scrapes on her knees. She crossed the space between them, her limp favoring one leg, though she stood tall. I owe you my life, she said, her voice low and steady, and my land still standing cause of you. I got a spare room at the ranch. You'd be welcome there. No questions. No past. Jonas studied her a long while, seeing the raw defiance still burning in her gaze. A kind of war fire. He understood it, carried it too. He reached into his coat, drew out the old revolver she'd used to finish Judd Claymore. He turned it in his hand, then held it out to her. You won't need me again, he said, but keep this close. Ain't every fight over. Martha's hand closed around the grip, her fingers brushing his. A small thing, but it felt heavier than it should. You're wrong, she said, her voice cracking for the first time. We all carry our ghosts. Yours, mine, this town's. The war's done, but it never leaves. You could stay. Let it stop chasing you. Jonas gave a faint, crooked smile, one side of his mouth lifting. Some men ain't meant to outrun it. She swallowed whatever words were left and nodded. Jonas turned, mounting his dust-coated gelding with practiced ease. He tipped his hat to Silas, to the town, to Martha last. As he rode toward the rising sun, the town stood silent behind him. Dry Fork Canyon watching the man disappear down the trail, knowing they'd speak his name in whispers long after the dust settled. Men like Jonas Creed didn't leave graves behind. They left stories. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of burned wood and fresh earth. High up in the hills, a lone figure crouched amid the rocks. One of Judd's men, bloodied but alive, rifle across his knees. His eyes followed the lone rider, and in them burned the black promise of vengeance. The frontier wasn't done with Jonas Creed yet. They say out in Dry Fork Canyon, if you stand quiet at first light, you can still see the hitching rail. It leans now, weathered and gray with age, its posts splintered by time and long-ago bullets. No horses tie there anymore. The saloon's gone. The street's been swallowed by dust and weeds, and most of the old names have drifted into the grave or the wind. But that rail stands yet, stubborn as the woman who once hung from it, a silent witness to the day blood and courage bought a town back its soul. Folks don't forget the way the ground looked that morning, streaked with blood and gunpowder, bodies cooling in the dust, the dawn light catching on the barrel of a lone rifle high above. They don't forget the way Martha Cade, battered but unbowed, raised her chin and put a bullet between Judd Claymore's eyes, standing in the very street where no one else had dared. The story's told different ways now, depending on who you ask. Some make Martha a pistol-wielding hellcat who spat in the face of death. Others swear Jonas Creed was a ghost, a spirit sent by the dead of Shiloh to set things right. But one truth winds through every version, that for one blood-soaked dawn, decency rose again in Dry Fork Canyon. Martha rebuilt her ranch with her own hands, the scorched earth tilled and seeded, fences raised, cattle driven in from neighboring spreads. Folks who once turned their backs on her came offering tools and timber. In time, she became the town's rock, a woman whose word carried weight, whose fields yielded more than most, and whose hearth always bore a single, battered revolver above it. The same one she used to end Judd Claymore, its worn grip polished by use and memory alike. The townsfolk, shamed by their cowardice, found their spines again in the retelling. They spoke of that day around fires and in the glow of lamplight, passing it down, so their sons might know what kind of steel it took to stand when standing meant dying. Outlaws gave Dry Fork a wider berth after that. Lawmen, when they finally returned, rode a little straighter in their saddles, knowing they patrolled a place that had clawed its dignity back with blood and grit. And as for Jonas Creed, well, no one knows where he went. Some say he headed south, others north to Montana. A few swear they saw him years later, older, slower, but with those same gray eyes that looked through a man like glass. His name faded to a whisper in some places, a curse in others, but his legend lived where it counted. Out here, men like him don't come for glory. They don't ride into town to be thanked or remembered. They come because someone has to. Because when a good woman's strung up and the law's gone blind, there's no one else left but but the ghosts of war and the kind of men who walk with them. They say on certain cold mornings, if the wind cuts just right through the canyon, you'll hear a rifle crack far off in the hills, a sharp, clean report that fades quick into the silence. And maybe, just maybe, that means somewhere another wrong's been set right by a man who never learned how to stop fighting. And in Dry Fork Canyon, the hitching rail stands still,